Hey everyone, how you doing? It's Benner from Black Fawn Distro, and welcome back to another edition of 90s Night. Kells, my guest, my
Yes.
co-host, my the person. I don't know what you want your
You're
introduction to be, but it's
everything.
Happy New Year, Happy 2025. What do you got going on? How's it going?
It's going great. I mean, it's been a while since we've done one of these suckers. It's been so long my hair has changed color yet again, so that is always how I tell the passage of time. But 2025 has been a year so far, so let's keep trucking
You know
along.
what? It's really funny. I saw a meme the other day that said, dear 2025, I've decided to cancel my subscription. I've seen the 15 or 14 or 15-day free trial, and I'm not interested anymore. So I don't know. I know there's lots going on in the world right now, but hey, that's not what we're here for. We're here for 90s Night, which is where me and Kells, now we work together. We work for Black Fawn Distro, and we decided to start the show as a YouTube broadcast show where we review an awesome film that we love from the 90s and kind of do a deep dive into it and sort of get into the nitty gritty details of the marketing and the production and what we liked and what we didn't like and that sort of stuff when it comes to the film. So before we get into today's episode, I just want to let everyone know, thank you for checking out the show. And of course, you're probably checking this out on YouTube because that's where we post it. And if you are on YouTube and on our channel, please make sure you check out our other shows and other content. We've got a whole bunch of other shows, including Hot Stoves from Hell, our Takeover Tuesday interview series, as well as Kels's Streams and Screams, and believe it or not, the return of Benner's Movie Reviews, which is my little show that I have been very, 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 very lazy on, and I'm resurrecting it from the grave in 2025. And I've got my first review coming out sometime soon, my first review back. And we had a competition, Kells, where we would see who could do the most reviews, and you're like so far ahead of me now that it's just
Yeah.
ridiculous. But my
Yeah,
goal,
catch up.
my goal this year is to at least tie you, or at least get somewhere close, so it looks somewhat respectable at the end of this year. But hey, listen, if you are checking us out on YouTube, check out our other content, and please remember, if you dig what we're doing, please remember to share and subscribe. It would mean the world to us, and it helps us spread the word about this stuff as well as everything else that Black Fawn Distro does. So anyway, without further ado, Kells, what are we reviewing today? It's no secret, but
Today, if you notice the title card or have paid any attention to what you clicked on, we are going to be reviewing the movie Seven as part of like a almost trilogy. We had like a serial killer trilogy for a little bit with Silence of the Lambs and this, and TBD for the other one, but also this is kind of stumbling into David Fincher trilogy territory because we had Alien Cubed as well as this. And so really it's whatever the next film is that kind of determines which one shall be the trilogy. But at any rate, we are talking about Seven because it's very exciting. And again, serial killers and David Fincher. Where can you go wrong with both of those things?
we've been waiting to do this for a long time, like you said.
Yeah.
And just a fair warning to everyone out there, this is going to be a spoiler. It's not going to be spoiler free. There are going to be spoilers. We're
Mhm.
going to be talking about this film in depth. So that's your warning to get out. But hopefully we figure, like, after 30 years, this movie came out in
Mhm.
1995. So 30 years, we figure that you've probably seen the film already by now. But if you haven't and you want some of the surprises to stay intact, we'd recommend that you maybe not watch the rest of this episode and go and watch that film right away, and we'll tell you
Yes.
where to do it in the links below. But of course, it's a fantastic film, and if you haven't seen it, you really should add it to your repertoire of films that you've watched in this year or before. So anyway, throwing back to you, Kels. Obviously, you always have a drink that we do as a tie-in. What have you got for our audience today?
So my creepy cocktail for today is called the box. What's in the box, you might ask? Great question. So
What's
it
in
is
the
a
box,
combination.
man? What's in the box?
It's a combination of whiskey because I feel like that's like a very like gritty detective type of liquor to have. A
Mm.
heavy drenching of sour mix because it's rains a lot and also it's kind of sour, gritty taste, and a splash of cranberry juice to top it all off. And let's try it. I
Awesome.
mean, I've
Taste
already
test.
had some.
Have
It's
you already had?
great.
Oh, it's good then. Yeah. You've already made the
I still
adjustment to
try it
apply.
anyways. It's really good. It's a little sour, but I think that like works with the whiskey in a great way. So I'm a fan of this. But you a collector, avid collector of physical media, you have a very official synopsis for the film today.
Yes, absolutely. And if you want to know how Kells made that drink, check it out on our Instagram at Black Fawn Distro. We do put the recipe up there as well. And of course, please drink responsibly at home in your basement or in your living room while you're watching movies. Don't be driving around or doing anything else. That's crazy. But yes, make that drink because it looks delicious. I'm actually doing dry January this month, which sucks. But yeah, I've got just a glass of rainwater here from which I thought was a nice tie-in to the film. But yes, you're absolutely correct. I do have my copy of 7 here, which is on Blu-ray, and I had to pull this out because now I just recently bought the 4K. Just got released from. It was supervised by David Fincher, the remastering of this film on 4K for the 30th anniversary of the film's release. It is fantastic. I've got it sitting back here on the shelf. So I'll just pull this out for everyone. It's really cool. And if you're a collector of physical media, make sure you go and pick this one up. It looks absolutely stunning. But as I put that back there, but for 4K, sometimes like they've done such a great job on this and everyone knows what this movie's about, but it doesn't have a synopsis on it. So I had to go back and grab my trusty Blu-ray, which I still haven't traded in yet after buying this 4K. So let's get at it. 2 cops track a brilliant and elusive killer who orchestrates a string of horrific murders, each kill targeting a practitioner of one of the 7 deadly sins. Good use of the word practitioner there. Gwyneth Paltrow also stars in this acclaimed thriller set in a dour, drizzly city sick with pain and blight. David Fincher guides the action, physical, mental, and spiritual with a sure understanding of what terrifies us, right up to a stunning denouncement that will rip the scar tissue off the most hardened soul. Good God, man. Like, what a great synopsis. That's like one of the best we've ever read on this show, I gotta say.
That's great. They have like some solid practitioner in there. They've got denouement. They've got like some solid words thrown about in that one. They've got some good like $5, $10 words, and I appreciate that in a very serious
$5 or $10 word. Yeah, absolutely.
I appreciate that in a very serious synopsis. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, if you didn't know this movie and you picked it up in the video store, like back in like 95 or 96, maybe when it hit the shelf and you read that, you'd be like, oh my goodness, I've heard a lot about this movie from people around the water cooler at work. And why would you not pick this up and rent it after that synopsis? But anyway, let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. Kells, let's go through the quick production initial release breakdown of 7. Over to you.
Yeah, so it was released by New Line Cinema, theatrically released on September 22nd, 1995. So we are just at the 30-year mark, coming up on the anniversary in a couple months. Fantastic. Production of the film occurred in Los Angeles, California. Production actually began on December 12th, 1994 and ended in February 95. So it was 55 days of filming, which both seems like a lot and not so many given like the caliber of this film and how intense it is and how much goes on. So I thought that was interesting. Directed by David Fincher, following Alien 3. Written by Andrew Kevin Walker, who also wrote Sleepy Hollow and Brain Scan. And starring, of course, Morgan Freeman, Brad Pitt, Kevin Spacey, Gwyneth Paltrow. And also, I thought it was kind of fun that Andrew Kevin Walker has a writer cameo in the film as the dead man at the first crime scene. So he popped up in there, did his thing, stayed dead, and then cash his check, I guess. I don't know. But speaking of cash and checks, box office.
Yeah, box office. I mean, this film was definitely considered a hit. So the budget on the film was $33 million when it was made. Domestic box office $100 million. No international box office to report, of course, at the time. That didn't really play into the numbers in the 90s. So you have a total worldwide box office of $100 million. Of course, all numbers USD. And the movie spent 4 consecutive weeks at the top of the US box office charts, which is impressive because it is a hard R film. And I feel like in the 90s, studios were willing to take risks on that and put out a really good film that was R-rated. And I remember, and we'll get into this a little bit later on, but I remember people always talking about this film for as soon as it came out. Like, you got to go and see it. You got to go and see it. It was one of those. So that probably explains why it spent so many weeks at the top of the box office. Runtime, 2 hours and 7 minutes. I would say a perfect runtime. And I think this movie does nothing but earn that runtime from basically as soon as the movie starts, right to when the credits roll backwards. It doesn't overstay its welcome. And it's perfectly timed and perfectly paced film. So currently it's 84% on Rotten Tomatoes, which I would argue is a bit low. but with 152 reviews, with the critical consensus being a brutal, relentlessly grimy shocker with taut performances, slick gore effects, and a haunting finale. Kells, you've got some intro or some info on the marketing of the film and how it was released to the public.
I do. And I do have to say, at 84% in Rotten Tomatoes, shocking. However, given the fact that it's a rated R film from 1995, I feel like that is still pretty high. So I'm going to
It's
just kudos
high,
to them
I
for that.
think.
It's high. It's just not as high as it should be in modern era. If it would be
There.
released today, it would be like 99%. We'll just say that.
I
Anyways,
would agree with that. Yeah.
marketing of the film in theaters and on home video. So some of the taglines for this film: long is the way and hard that out of hell leads up to light. Detective Somerset is looking for a way out. Detective Mills is looking for a way in. Now they're caught in a game where the price of sin is death. The next one: 7 deadly sins, 7 ways to die. Very dramatic. The next, which is just a listing of the sins: gluttony, greed, sloth, envy, wrath, pride, lust. On the poster, all of them in a row. You know exactly what you're in for. And the last one that they had listed was "Let he who is without sin try to survive," which is very edgy, I think. So
I like that
kudos.
one. I
I
feel
liked
like I
that
like
one.
that one the best.
Yeah, I feel like the one that just lists the sins, just I feel like is a little lazy, but also like we just need to remind people so they kind
Now
of
that
know what
poster
to
is really
expect going
awesome,
in.
and I
It's
had
a
that
great
poster. I
poster.
bought it at a poster fair when I was in university, and I had it on. I think we had it on the back of the closet wall in my
Hmm.
dorm room with
Beautiful.
my roommates. So
Speaking of
yeah. Anyway,
Speaking of college, how did we first watch this film? And how were you introduced to the source material, memories, formats you checked it out on? How did we uh consume this film?
so what's so funny? You're gonna laugh at this, but what's so funny is like I actually don't remember when I watched this film for the first time. I
That's my
remember when I
line.
was not supposed to watch it because I remember me and my buddy we were like teenagers, so we would have been when this movie came out probably would have been about 13.
Mhm.
And I remember my mom we were going to the mall and they had the movie theater in the mall. And my mom said, "You can go see whatever you want, but I don't want you going to see that Seven movie," because a coworker of hers had seen it like on the weekend before or something, and he was like, "Yeah, that movie's messed up. Like it's not for kids." So my mom, being my mom, was like, was like, "I do not want you to go and see." Now we were going to try and sneak in to see it because as soon as as a kid, as soon as a parent tells you like not to go see something, you're like,
Yeah,
you know what I want
sign
to
me
do right
up.
now? I want to see that before anything else. But we didn't for some reason. I can't remember when because it was 30 years ago. But I know I probably watched it on VHS after that. But I just don't know when. I don't remember watching this movie, but I've seen this movie probably, I'm guessing probably 7, 8 times, maybe more. I'm not sure.
7
7. That's
times?
right. See what I did
Mhm.
there? so, but but I have watched this on, like I've watched it on VHS, I've watched it on DVD, Blu-ray, and now 4K. And I gotta say, the 4K looks absolutely stunning. It's amazing, and I like watching 4Ks just because if you've got the right setup, it is like watching the movie for the first time, of which I
Mhm.
can't remember. But it is. I have seen it in multiple formats. I was trying to go and see it in IMAX because
Mhm.
they did release the film in for limited a limited time in IMAX theaters, but I didn't get a chance to go to see one a screening near me, unfortunately. But hopefully they come back to that because that would be something else for sure. How about
Yeah,
you?
for sure. So recently I watched this one on Netflix because it's there until January 31st, but I do also own it on DVD. And I think that was the copy that I originally had of DVD on DVD when it first kind of was released on DVD. So it's around the time when I saw it. I was old enough, but um, probably still unprepared for what I was about to experience, which is my favorite way to watch a movie, I think. So yeah, as per usual, no recollection of when or how I first saw it. I feel like this would be one of those films that like my dad probably would have shown me because he also showed me like The Exorcist and Poltergeist and The Omen and all that stuff. So I feel like this
Yeah.
was one of those ones that'd be like, this is a cinema. So I feel like I would have watched it for that reason. But I can't say for certain, and I never can. So yeah.
Okay, well, let's dive into the film because we got lots to talk about, lots to go into on this
Yes.
on this film.
There is a
One
lot.
is we kind of touched on this a little bit when we did our review of Alien 3, which if you haven't checked out, you can check it out on our YouTube channel. But
Mhm.
David Fincher's first movie being Alien 3, a horrible experience, production from hell. I am surprised he even went on to make other movies after that. He hates that movie so much because of what he had to endure. But for this movie to be the second movie that he made, his second feature, is absolutely phenomenal. It's I think personally it's a movie that filmmakers strive to make their entire careers, perhaps.
Yeah.
And for him to get it on sort of the second try is I almost don't believe it, to be honest, because it's to me it's fairly close to a perfect film, I would say, if not a perfect film. So, but I mean, again, it's a movie that I, even watching the other night, and we'll get into these details for sure, but it really felt like, it doesn't feel like a movie that was made 30 years ago. It feels like a movie that was set in the 90s that was made a couple years ago, if that makes any
Yeah.
sense. I feel it's very, very, it still connects, it still delivers that sort of knockout punch in, obviously in the finale, but also during key sequences in the film. I feel like it still delivers that sort of that overarching sort of nihilistic, dour, and as the synopsis said, grimy. It's so it's so textured and so
Mhm.
well built that I don't know if, like, what you would change in this to make it any better. And so when you were saying, like, let's do 7, let's review this as part of the 90s night, and I can't remember, was it me that suggested that? I can't remember. I thought it was you, but who knows, whatever.
You can
But
tell.
when we started doing Silence of the Lambs, when we did our review on 90s Night for Silence of the Lambs, we basically said we got to do 7 because we got to compare those
Mhm.
films because they're so close as far as the level of where they're held in
Mhm.
sort of I don't know,
The oeuvre.
the oeuvre of film. Yet they're totally different films. They don't
Yeah.
bite really on each other's style, not really. And or 7 doesn't, I guess. Silence of the Lambs wouldn't be able to do that, but 7 doesn't bite on
Impossible.
Silence of the Lambs too much, if at all. And I just really think it's a fantastic film, as far as like how it's paced, how it's structured, and how it delivers. Um,
Yeah.
your thoughts off the top?
Yeah, I think, sort of what you were saying about how it's there's something sort of timeless about this film. Like you said, like, it feels like a movie that was set in the 90s that was filmed a couple years ago. There's something timeless about the struggles of it, the story of it, the themes of it, the whole kind of nihilistic, dour vibe to it, as you were saying. And the fact that, like, I mean, they use some very ancient technology in this, but it doesn't seem to be heavily reliant on the technology. Like, they really just sort of use, like, they still use microfiche, which is a classic detective film thing, I think, to see.
Also a fun word to
Um,
say, microfiche.
Microfiche, such a fun word to say. And I know that this was one of those films that when David Fincher was casting Kevin Spacey and Brad Pitt, he told them, "This is not going to be the movie you're remembered for, but it may be a movie you're incredibly proud of." And I feel like absolutely it would be, because this really is unlike any other film that kind of came out in that era. And I know when we were talking about doing serial killer films, like this one and Silence of the Lambs were the two right off the bat. We're like, these are the two, these are the top two anybody ever thinks about, ever talks about when you're talking about serial killer films just in general. I feel like even in the 2000s, we haven't really had anything that's matched this type of film. And I think there's something really spectacular about it. And along with the timeless quality, I mean, there's something about it because it's not really like, where is this movie set? What city is this movie set in? You don't know. It could be literally anywhere. Like,
Yeah.
it could be New York, it could be LA, it could be Chicago, it could be some tiny little city in the middle of nowhere. It's just sort of timeless and universal that way, which I think is really great. And when you think about the budget, 33 million, that seems like a lot for what the film is. But when you think about how much it would cost to get the permits to film, to shut down streets and buildings in LA, like in a metropolitan city, and it's also like constantly raining through the film, so they had to have rain machines pretty much throughout the whole thing, because it's also in LA. Like, it's typically not a very rainy city, from my understanding. But the filmmakers wanted to have that rain, it constantly raining, for two reasons. It added a sense of dread, and they never had to worry about bad weather, which is
Mhm.
fair. If you just keep it consistently bad, you never have to worry about having a bad day. Um, so yeah, I feel like this is one of those films that just lives on in perpetuity of itself, because there is so much behind it, within it, around it, that speaks to people, that will continue to speak to people, and has these themes, these ideas that are sort of bigger than the plot of a film, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it almost feels like a movie that was made ahead of its time, but
Yeah.
also it's very realistic of when it was made
Mhm.
in its time. Like it's one of those things that I just feel like when I watch certain sci-fi movies and horror movies, sometimes I'm like, oh wow, this feels like a movie that especially sci-fi. Like some people just
Mhm.
predict kind of where things might be going from a creative point of view. And so therefore when you watch them 20, 25 years in the future, it does still seem relevant. So the film still connects on that sort of visceral level. And I think this is a you don't really say that about thrillers. You don't really say that about
Yeah.
other films because everything is typically dated. We always talk about like computer screens, cell phones, the easily identifiable things that kind of you know exactly sort of when the movie is set just based on what phones
Mhm.
people are using, because we're so inundated with that technology now. But it's interesting that a couple of things you just mentioned was that yes, the city is never described. It's never pinpointed as to what
Stated,
city it
yeah.
is. It's sort of alluded to that it's supposed to be New York or maybe Chicago, but you just never know. And it looks to me like I always get the vibe that it's a combination of those two cities, but it could be anywhere, which I think also makes it a little bit more impactful, right? Like, I mean, it could
For
be the
sure.
closest metropolitan metropolis, as you just almost said, like close to you, right? So maybe it's
Mhm.
Toronto, maybe it is LA, maybe it's you know,
Calgary, who knows?
Calgary or
Yeah.
Dallas or whatever. So it's very interesting in how they on because not only is the rain machines and the rain throughout the city, but also the ending does feel very like you're in the middle of nowhere and you've sort of transitioned from this cityscape to sort of this desert and very barren wasteland type of
Mhm.
place, which you could argue somehow it's kind of sort of exists outside of those cities or a lot of cities anyway. So the other thing too is the rain. Interesting
Yeah.
fact about the 4K is that David Fincher actually went in and did some tweaking, very, very minor tweaking, added some CGI and did use AI a little bit, just to correct sort of tracking movements and things that things that annoyed him a lot. So the reason I mention that right now is because there was a scene where they had a rain machine that was kind of broken, or it wasn't
Mm.
really up to snuff, but they didn't want to cancel the shooting day, so they just shot with what they had, and it rained a lot more on the one side of the screen than the other, and so he's gone in and added some digital rain in there, which I couldn't tell, but just to kind of smooth over that scene so it works like consistently, right? But for all intents and purposes, I mean the other thing too is again, you mentioned the lack of technology, and the one thing that I love about this movie, and it's funny too because my experience while we're doing these shows has been I'm wondering if I'm watching the movie differently because I'm trying to kind of pick things real like right out of it as opposed to just sitting and watching a movie. And I think that that's an interesting experience for at least for myself. I don't know if you share that, but for me, like what I noticed was that it was the reliance on old technology, right?
Yeah.
Like books,
Typewriters, microfiche,
yeah, microfiche
Cole's Notes.
typewriters, like Cole's notes, right? And
Yeah.
which is hilarious that I mean, I don't want to explain that. We're on a time budget right now, but like Cole's notes, look them up. Or Cliff Notes is the other one. I think it's Cliff Notes,
Yeah.
and
I think it
Cole's
is
Notes
Cliff
I think
Notes
are
in the States.
Canadian, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
something like that. Cliff Notes are American, whatever. Anyway, but the idea that detective work is like the focus of the film. It's what
Mhm.
drives the film. It's what carries these characters and brings these characters together, kind of drives them apart, and then brings them
Mhm.
back together again to sort of like finish this story. I love all the things that Morgan Freeman's character is like his reliance on books and knowledge in
Yep.
order to sort of defeat crime and evil that exists around him. And again, I think like it's you watch the film and you're very much like you don't miss all of this other technology that we have. And I also felt like there's still forensics in the film, and there's knowledgeable people that work in the police department, like the coroner,
Mhm.
Everybody that comes in to kind of does this, the sort of the quote unquote the cop science, for these murders. But realistically, like even if you had cell phones and all this stuff, like the detective work is what draws them from crime scene to crime scene, not some sort of technological advancement. And even if they
Right.
did have those technological advancements, they
It don't make
probably
a
wouldn't help.
difference.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So I thought that
Yeah.
was, I don't know. I love this film. I could go on about it for hours, but yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
I feel like sorry, go ahead.
no, 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 I'm finished.
Uh, I feel like the other nice thing with the technology or lack thereof is it also says a lot about the character. Like Somerset, he uses a typewriter. He uses a metronome to help himself sleep. He has like record player. Like his is a very analog, very like basic kind of old school kind of technology, which says a lot about his character, which I think is also a really nice way to kind of connect to him and feel his character in a way that is a little bit more personal, and it's not as like it's not just blatant exposition. It's sort of describing who he is without. It's a show don't tell moment, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. And I
Right.
really kind of love that. And so much of the casting in this film is just absolute perfection, even just down to like the characters that are in it for one scene, like Leland Orser, who is the killer, I guess, in the Lust murder. In preparation for his traumatic scene in the interrogation room, he'd like hyperventilate, so he would be like overly saturated with oxygen. He wouldn't sleep for a couple of days, so he looked really disoriented and sort of out of it. And it pays off because that performance, one scene, one and a half scenes, perfection. So good, so minutely detailed that it really kind of you lose him in that role, and
Yeah.
it just sort of sells that trauma that much more effectively. And Kevin Spacey as well, like the producers intended that they wanted to have him receive top billing at the start of the movie, but David Fincher was like, you know what, I really want to have this not be so obvious who the killer is, because if you know that Kevin Spacey's in this movie and you go all the way through the movie and you don't see Kevin Spacey, you kind of have an idea of like, all right, well, it's got to be Kevin Spacey as the killer because why else is he here in this movie? Or you're just waiting for him to show up the whole time on screen. You're like, where's Kevin Spacey? So they didn't have him do any of the press stuff, so he got to sit out of all the PR stuff, which I'm sure he was thrilled about. But it also kind of adds to that element of like, oh shit, that's Spacey. What's he doing here? When there is kind of that big reveal of him being John Doe. So
Well,
um,
his reveal is so epic as well
impactful, yeah.
because he is on the screen for a while, the character
Hmm.
at least, before you actually know who he is,
Yeah,
until he walks into the police station, right? So, and when he's
right.
like detectives, like it's such an awesome sort of, it's a very unexpected reveal. Like, and I love this film for that reason. That like everything that happens in it is not necessarily expected. I didn't think, even when I was watching it this time around, I was like, man, I wish I could go. Like, I always think about like going back and listening to a song, like a really awesome song for the first time. Like, imagine just driving around or like sitting on your back deck and hearing a brand new song that's like now a classic. Like, imagine going back and watching this film for the first time. Like, you would have
Hmm.
no idea where this movie is going. Essentially from the get go, from the opening, from sort of the opening, the initial murder.
For sure.
You don't really have any idea as to like what's
What
happening,
direction you're
or how
headed
the
in.
characters are going. What's interesting to me, I had a note down here, Kells, was that I had never put this together before, but when you mentioned the guy from I can't remember that actor's name. He's a great character actor though too, and
Leland Orser.
Leland Orser. He's in a ton
Hmm.
of stuff. He's like one of those
Oh
guys
yeah,
where you're like, oh yeah, that guy, that guy.
yeah. He's
Um,
in some
he's
Alien
an
Three.
Alien
No,
Resurrection, I think, right?
Resurrection. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Resurrection.
Yeah.
So, and
Resurrection.
like a ton of other stuff. And the other thing too, what I did notice was like, I wonder how much this movie influenced Dark Knight. And everyone says that Heat was the main inspiration for Dark Knight, and you can see that it's painted over that film, no problem. But the idea that when they finally have John Doe in custody, nothing's revealed about him. You don't know where he came from. You don't know what his
Hmm.
background was. They say his bank account's only 5 years old, and that's very, very similar to kind of like the Joker's like backstory or lack thereof in Chris
Right.
Nolan's Dark Knight. I never really put that together, and I wonder. I mean, listen, when we have Chris Nolan on the show, we'll ask him. But like, I had never put that together as that might have been an influence for that character. And it's funny
Hmm.
because that so stands out in The Dark Knight, right? But anyway, that's just it's just something that I thought was interesting. And you're right. I think that the lust sequence is one of the most gut wrenching scenes that I've seen, and I think I remember that because I watched it when I watched it as a teenager. I felt like it's perfectly placed. It's perfectly set up. A lot of things are like that in this movie, where
Right.
they're like, here's something that is terrible that is going to happen. And we've left these breadcrumbs along where and like you said, much like Kevin Spacey's reveal as John Doe,
Hmm.
that this is going to not be good, but there's all these breadcrumbs that sort of like your imagination sort of is chugging along, sort of doing some of the work before you actually even
Yeah.
get to these horrific crime scenes. And then when you get there, it has that much more of an impact. And I think it's like when they go to the leather shop and they see the Polaroid, and he
Wild
said,
Bill's Leather Shop.
you
Yeah.
made this? And he's like, yeah. And it's like, but you never see what it is. You just know that here are two detectives that have kind of seen everything, and they've seen a lot up to this point, and they're both still like, what the hell? Like, and so
Hmm.
when you,
Have that reveal in the photo too. It's like it's that much more like, oh my God.
yes, and you see it kind of at the crime scene, but there's a towel, so
Well,
you
you see the
know
photo, but you don't see the cadaver, but you see the photo of like what it is that
afterwards
he
when they're in
created
the
after
interrogation
that.
room, which
Yeah.
is like, so
And
you've seen it, you know that there's
yeah,
a photo, you've seen it with like there's a towel that's over him, and he's like, get this thing off me, and so now
yeah,
you're like, and then you go into this interrogation room, which is like so like crazy and raw and like emotional,
for
and
sure.
then you see the picture, and it's like,
Device.
God, it's like that stuff. They don't do that in films anymore, and they really should,
Yeah.
because it's I feel like a friend of mine said, your imagination does half the work to get there,
Absolutely.
to
Yeah.
deliver on that, to deliver on that shock and that impact, which is
Yeah.
I don't know, great. And the sloth death is like the same way. It's very much like, I love the reveals in this film and how they get there. I think for the most
Mhm.
part they make sense. It's not necessarily uh, out of sorts for Somerset and Mills to kind of work together and sort of figure out how that they can bring whatever they bring to the detective work that they're doing. So,
Right.
but anyway,
Yeah, I think it's also, speaking of your imagination working overtime, it really does do a lot of the heavy lifting in this film because it's a gruesome film, but it's not necessarily a gory film. Like even the climactic moment at the end, your brain fills in the blanks of seeing it. You never see it. That moment with the lust killing, you never see like all those really graphic, intense, gory deaths. It's mostly through implication, through like seeing something off at the other side of the screen that's sort of like half blurred. Your imagination does so much of the heavy lifting on this. I think the one killing that we really see kind of in its whole glory is the sloth death, or the gluttony death. But even still, like he's still alive at that moment, so it's seeing something that's really gruesome, but it's also like, so I don't know, I feel like it's a very gruesome film, especially in terms of the content of it and the emotion behind it. But it's not a particularly gory film though, which I think is very clever and something you never fully realize because it feels like it's gory, but it's not.
well, listen. On that note, let's take a quick break, and
Yeah.
we'll just gonna drop in we gotta pay to keep the lights on around here. So we'll be right back after these messages. But hold that thought, Kells, because I got something to
Yeah.
add on to that too, which I think kind of delivers on what you were talking about. So give us 2 seconds, and we'll be right back after this, and with our second half of 90s Night and our deep dive into 1995's Seven. Black Fawn Distro. Movies, merchandise, available now at blackfawndistribution.com. And we're back. This is the second half of our 90s Night special, which is we're diving into 1995's David Fincher's masterpiece, Seven, the serial killer film from the now well respected director, but at the time, someone that was out there with something to prove. Kells, welcome back as well. Thanks for sticking around. We were just talking, you were just mentioning about sort of everything that you see in this film and how it
Mhm.
feels like it's not. What did you say? It was not particularly
It's
gory, but
it's
it is.
not gory, but very gruesome. Like, you feel like you see more than you actually do. Your imagination does a ton of the heavy lifting with this, which
Yes.
I think is also a great way to kind of get around a lot of the stuff with censors as well. Yes, it's still a rated R film, but they're able to get away with a lot more just with the implication of it all.
Yeah, and what I was going to add before the break too was that this film is shot beautifully,
Oof.
but the content of what's being shot is so it's so decaying. Like and I
Mhm.
think this really set like what was cool too was that when we did Alien 3, if you watch the assembly cut of that film, there's hints of that of how Fincher likes to shoot this stuff, where he does like shooting stuff that's like dark and dour and decaying and decrepit and like this whole film is shot like that. Like I've never like everything from the apartment to obviously the crime scenes, and I just feel like you don't actually see any of the murders either.
No.
There's actually only one. There's only one murder you actually see in the film, and that's pretty impressive. Like there's like especially for a film that is considered, and again, like we had some back and forth as to whether or not we were going to do these serial killer flicks in the first place and review them, but we felt like especially this film, especially Silence of the Lambs, and our third film, TBD, we're horror films. Like they're billed as thrillers to get people in through the door to sit in seats,
Definitely.
but this is a horror film through and through. And
Yep.
for me, I think like when you look at everything that he captures, like there's even that scene, the scene where like it's like the eggs grilling on the grill, like it looks so grimy and
Great.
so
Yeah.
desolate that by the
Greasy.
time, yeah, greasy, and by the time you get to the to this barren wasteland where the film's climax takes place, you don't feel like you're in the real world anymore, and yet it somehow still feels organic, and you're connected to it in some weird emotional way. At least that's how I feel about it, and I feel like that's mostly because of what they capture on frame, um, with the sort of this dying like entity of like the city and stuff that's around these characters.
Mhm. No,
But speaking of,
absolutely. You
sorry,
speaking of the
and
characters, I was gonna
as you
say,
go,
let's
yeah, as you're talking, Kels, let's talk about the actors. I'm going to throw up a few stills on the screen
yeah.
here too, just to kind of illustrate these points. So if you're listening to this, I'm sorry you don't have the visual aids, but we'll do our best to describe them as we go along. But yeah, Kels, sorry to cut you off there. You were saying.
No, I was gonna talk about the casting actually and talk about, again, some of the actors in this film. So before Morgan Freeman and Brad Pitt, there they are, were originally cast. Al Pacino and Denzel Washington were early choices for Somerset and Mills, respectively. Al Pacino declined because he was already scheduled to film City Hall, and Denzel Washington turned down the offer because he thought the film was too dark. And
I mean, it's a
apparently
dark
both
film.
actors, it is
Yeah,
a very dark
yeah,
film. Both actors have expressed regret in not taking their offers because this film just absolutely blew up and became such a moment. Um, and again, continues to be such a moment in film. This is incredibly iconic, and I love the inclusion of Gwyneth Paltrow as well because she just seems so opposite of everything else. Like there's something even in this shot here when she's in this kind of very dour, greasy, grimy cafe or
yeah. She's in a
diner, whatever you want
diner
to call
when she
it.
calls Morgan Freeman. Yeah,
Yeah, she's just like there's something about her that's almost like ethereal. There's something like there's a little bit of sunshine that's just tucked behind a cloud is kind of what you see. And she brings like such a brightness to the film that makes you feel the humanity of it, because I feel like if you didn't have that character, we wouldn't feel the humanity of this film because there's so much darkness, there's so much uh, gross decay and danger around every corner that it's easy to kind of get a little bit jaded by that. But I love that she is constantly that anchor that pulls us back to the reality and the humanity of this film.
Well, what's interesting too, as well, like with Gwyneth Paltrow and Brad Pitt, is that they were actually dating at the time.
Hmm.
So you do sort of capture that sort of natural chemistry. I love that scene where they kind of, I think there are some moments in the film that provide some levity to the rest of this
Hmm.
sort of this I don't know what you would call
March.
it. Like the whole film is, yeah, this lurch of a story. But that when they come, when he she Gwyneth Paltrow calls Mills, which is Brad Pitt, in the office, and he has to pass the phone over to Morgan Freeman, and
Hmm.
she's very charming. Like he smiles on the phone, and even in the mix, the sound mix, even on the 4K. You can kind of hear what she's saying, but
Hmm.
not really. It's mostly focused on his reaction, which is a brilliant little piece of storytelling. When they go over to the dinner, Brad Pitt comes in, and he goes, "Hey, how's it going, loser?" to Gwyneth
And she
Paltrow,
goes,
and
"Hi, idiot."
hi,
Yeah, yeah.
idiot. Yeah, and I just thought it's like this touching sort of moment where, you find like they do such a great job. Speaking of the runtime, they do such a great job of establishing sort of like who these characters are in a very, very short period of time, but yet you still feel like you know them more than you should. And I don't think, I mean, especially like in today's world, like, I mean, I think that the relationship between Mills and Somerset is very, very well developed and fleshed out. Each character
Hmm.
has their own motivations for what they're doing, and they're like Somerset has a lot of hesitation to obviously continue on with this case, but knows that he has to do it because Mills isn't prepared. But Mills, just being sort of like younger, sort of a little bit more wet behind the ears, wants to get into the shit so bad because he wants to make a name for himself. But again, it's like I feel like there's these iconic scenes of these characters learning how to interact with each other, but also growing to learn and trust each other. I think that going back to the scene in the diner, right, with Gwyneth Paltrow, like I feel like that scene to me, it's funny because I always remember this scene, and I always thought it was great because it's such a touching moment between two characters. But
Hmm.
I had forgotten about the story Morgan Freeman tells her, which is basically a continuation or a little bit more of beneath the surface of the story he tells her at dinner when she says, did you ever get married? And he's like, I was close once,
Hmm.
but it kind of didn't work out. And it's sort of just like, oh, okay, well, whatever. He's probably just, what, but they go deeper onto Morgan Freeman's character and the regret that he is walking around with and the reasons why he made those decisions. And he explains those to Gwyneth Paltrow. That also sets up the ending, and you don't
Yeah.
actually realize that it's setting up the ending as he's telling that story. It's a master stroke of script writing, and to me, it's like one of the best scripts I think that I've ever seen, just because of
Yeah.
the way it transitions between all these characters while also still working in this really grim and dark story together.
Yeah, and I love that scene as well because you can really see between Somerset and Gwyneth Paltrow's character, whose name escapes me right now, but they have such an immediate sort of connection and understanding and appreciation of one another, so that it really kind of makes it so that what happens in the ending is not just a tragedy for Mills; it's a tragedy for Somerset. Like he feels that loss in a deep way. Also, and I think that's a really lovely way to kind of tie it together, build on that emotion, build on that connection without having it be like a very long extended, oh, now we're getting to know each other. Like it's an important scene that delivers a lot of information. There's a lot of exposition in that scene, but it never feels like an info dump. It feels like a way that they're bonding and they're connecting, so that at the end of the film it's that much more tragic for everyone involved, I think.
Yeah, and sorry for our listeners, Gwyneth Paltrow's character is Tracy. I just looked it up.
Thank you. I
I couldn't
forgot.
remember either. So I did wish that there was a little bit more of her. I think that's one of the things that that might have been a little bit of a benefit to the film overall. But again, keeping it around that 2 hours and 7 minute mark is, I think, when you start cutting off the fat in some scenes, and there are some extended deleted scenes, which I agree with why they were cut, to get that sort of pacing and runtime in check. So there's only so much you can do. However, I think they use the runtime wisely, and the character development I think is there. Also, I
Yeah.
think just the relationship between the captain and in Somerset, of how he's like, you're retiring in a week. And again, I think
Mhm.
what's awesome about this film is that some of the stuff, like the film is Seven Deadly Sins, right? Obviously, that takes place in a week, which is 7 days. And you also have like the detective that's retiring in a week and the hotshot young rookie. I mean, those are cliche things to have in films, especially detective films. And they are mostly used as a kind of like a callback or an homage to like sort of those previous, like, all the films that have come before it, without sort of like really creating something that's too cookie cutter. And I would argue that this movie is not cookie cutter at all, other than those quick sort of references. So I think, like, I mean, again, it's like, the crime scenes, some of the close-ups of things that are happening are like I said, like here's a still from the film of the box that Morgan Freeman opens up at the end. And of course, Brad Pitt. What I like about Brad Pitt's character too is he's broken down as well over the course of the film. So
Mhm.
he goes from like Brad Pitt, like, obviously he was in his heyday here. It was like, just a sex
Legends of the
symbol.
Fall and
Legends
yeah.
of the Fall came out. He was in his element. He was doing challenging roles as well, even after this, when he did 12 Monkeys and that sort of stuff. But
Mhm.
in this film, he goes from like a really good looking dude at the start, kind of put together. Like he's sort of like, rough around the edges, but whatever. And then by the end of the film, like he is broken down. His face is beat in. His arm is almost
Yeah.
broken. And I feel like that is like a clear, maybe too much on the head, but I think it's a very effective metaphor for the breaking of his soul, and that there
Yeah.
is literally nothing left of him at the end, even though he survives.
Yeah. And you know what? I'm gonna hot take disagree with you on the Tracy, the amount of Tracy that we get, because I feel like it is kind of the perfect amount, because you get enough time with her that you really care about her as a character. However, it's not pointing in a direction of her being in danger, because you don't have an overexposure to her. Every scene she's in furthers the characters of Mills and Somerset and their relationship, and gives us more information about them as characters. So I feel like with Tracy, she's just the right amount, because she's in enough that like you're like, oh, she's really lovely, she's a great character. But I feel like if she has too much presence, it's almost like the woman in the refrigerator syndrome of like, okay, now I know that this is building up as something bad's going to happen to
That's
this
true.
person
No,
because
no,
we've seen them a
that's
whole bunch of
yeah,
times. You know what I mean? So
yeah, yeah.
yeah, I'm going to disagree. I think that they kind of have just the right amount of Tracy, because she's there enough to make an impact, but also not too long that it becomes suspicious. And it also kind of
Right.
leans on to how inconsequential she is to John Doe as well. Because obviously this has a big impact on Somerset and Mills at the end of the film, but for John Doe, like he's jealous, but there's no big emotion of what he's done to her. It's just like, oh yeah, it's just a fact for him. So I think it was the perfect amount of Tracy. As much as I enjoyed her character, I feel like if I saw more of her, I'd be like, all right, okay. But that's just me.
Okay, no, fair enough. No, that's a good
Mhm.
call. That's a good call. It's just yeah, okay. Maybe I'll agree with that. Yeah. I think that I mean, she does add a lot to the film, I think.
She
And
does.
she feels like she's not just like roped into this either. Like
Yeah.
there's definitely, and she's a school teacher as well, and
Yeah.
she's
Yeah.
having a hard time sort of like finding a job in the new city and that
And
sort of stuff,
adjusting and yeah.
adjusting. And so I think it's like she does play an important part in this film, um for sure. So yeah, okay, yeah, maybe I do agree with that. You've changed my mind on that, so I will strike that
Okay.
from my notes. Let's talk about some of our favorite scenes, just
Yeah.
because this movie is loaded with them. And
Yeah.
we're probably going to go over on this episode, but I think it's worth doing. But let's just see if we can rattle them off here. But at the same time, let's give them some room to breathe if we need to.
Sure.
What
Um,
do you got?
so so for me, like obviously the ending of the film is just so great, so iconic. But the ending of the movie, it was apparently in the original draft of the screenplay that everyone had signed on to, but before filming had started, one of the producers, Arnold Copelson, had rewritten the ending to have John Doe kidnap Tracy with Mills and Somerset racing to save her. But David Fincher, Brad Pitt, and Morgan Freeman, when they read the new ending, they're all like, absolutely not. We're not making this film unless you let us go back to do what we'd signed on for the original ending. They said basically put it back or we're not doing the movie. So they did, and thank goodness they did, because it's a much more appropriate scene for the weight of this movie. I feel like if it was like, oh well, now we can save her, it wouldn't have the same, like it would feel cheap. It would feel lazy. It would feel obvious. So I love that it kind of takes you in that different, much harsher direction. So that obviously favorite scene, love it. As previously mentioned, the interrogation scene with the lust killer victim person.
Mhm.
That is such a great scene, particularly because of the performance by Leland Orser. But also, it's just like, again, you reveal so much in that scene, that it really adds to the oh shit of the whole situation. And I would say my other favorite scenes would be like, I like when they find the bodies. I like the scenes when they're like, oh,
So that
there's
was your
a
note to
there's
me.
a
Your note to
murder.
me was like, I said, what scenes are you going to talk about so we don't double up? And you said, I like when they find the bodies. And I was like,
Yeah.
it's like all the whole movie.
I know, and it's great. But I love the scenes. Yeah, I love the scenes where it's like, "Oh, here's this murder scene." I think that's great. I love those. I love the gluttony. I love the lust scene. There's just something about, like, stumbling upon that, but also knowing the meticulous planning that went into creating that, like, how long he had that person in the room, and how long he had prepared for this lust killing with getting that whole thing made. And like it really speaks to the intensity of John Doe as a killer, which I love. I think that's just great. But what
Like,
are your yeah.
yeah, I would say like the sloth. I love all the scenes like that when they get close to John Doe and they almost grab him.
Mhm.
The sloth scene, um like is great. I mean, I always remember all of the and I've just thrown one of the stills up here when they kind of come into that apartment, all of
Mhm.
the evergreen, sort of
Air
classic evergreen
fresheners.
air fresheners, and
Yeah.
there's like hundreds of them, like in the
Yeah.
and I always felt like going into, like, it's like, oh my god, like, because you can, it's like, it's one of those movies that you can kind of, you don't just experience it, you feel it and smell it, like you feel like you're in those places, and they're not good places to be in. The other thing is when they track down John Doe, and
Yeah.
they I love the scene when they're like, we can't go into the apartment, like if we go into the apartment it's admissible, but you're like I love that scene because it's like, that you, as the audience member, you want Mills to go in there because you want to get in
Yeah,
there.
you're
But
like, "Do
Somerset
it."
wants to get in there too. Like, he wants to get in there. I love the scene when they're in the apartment and they're going through the books, and he tells that, like, Morgan Freeman just reads from the book. That's a scene that's always stuck with me forever. And when he says he's on the train and he starts laughing at the guy. I won't get into, I
'Cause
won't,
he vomits all over
yeah,
him. Yeah.
vomits all over him, and then he can't stop laughing, and like, it's just, and he goes, this is just, there's no dates, there's nothing, it's
Yeah.
just, and that's obviously that's a throwback to the opening sequence of the movie, which is the opening
Mhm.
credits, which is like one of the best opening credits sequences ever put to films, being ripped off and copied so many times.
Mhm.
Also using a remix of Closer by Nine Inch Nails, and it's like,
Great.
I loved this movie when it came out, and like, there were so many things like that in there where I was like, I want you to go in there. So I want you to go into the apartment, even though I know it might put you in jeopardy,
Mhm.
but it still continues the story enough. That is, I think, the one thing I think in the plot that is, they needed a reason. They needed, speaking of Your Name Tonight, has a library card. Uh, Getting from where they kind of end off in sort of like the second act to get to John Doe's apartment, I feel is like a little bit of a stretch, but I still buy it, and I still think it's a great plot detail that kind of keeps the movie rolling enough where uh, everything that happens afterwards is such a build up and such a great execution. Like I always say, one of the most important things about any film is the ending, because it's the last thing you
Mm.
see before you leave the theater, and the first thing you talk about after you leave the theater. So for
Right.
this movie, I 100% agree. The ending is just absolutely just devastating. And going back to like that scene between Tracy and Somerset in the diner, when he says to her, if you decide, like, the way he says it too is so great, but he said, if you decide to keep, if you don't decide to keep the baby, if that's your decision, right? I'm just
Mhm.
paraphrasing as the character here, then don't ever tell him about it. And so at the end, you never know like what her, like you don't know what she
Decision would have been.
decided, like
Mhm.
because he's busy on this case too, right? So maybe she was going to, but you don't know. And that's, that's one of my favorite lines in the film, is that reveal, because as soon as that happens, you're just like, oh god. And again, it's very much like the apartment scene where you're like, don't go in there, don't be emotional and
Mhm.
just fly off the handle and do this thing as a cop, right? But as an audience member, I'm like, yes, do that, because I want to get
Yeah.
and see what
Like,
happens.
how can you not?
And at
Yeah.
the and then at the end, it brings it back, and you're just like, oh no, like no, 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 like, and you don't know what to do, because anybody in that situation, like, it's just I don't know if anybody would be able to not do what Mills does at the end.
Yeah.
And speaking of which, on the Blu-ray, I think this is an old DVD special features. It has been ported over to the Blu-ray as well as the 4K. Is that there is an alternate ending where Somerset kills John Doe.
Mm.
Now it's just storyboarded out. I don't think they ever filmed it, but it doesn't work quite as well.
No.
And when I was watching it this time around, I was really like, I just think it works better with Mills over the course of the film. Like his arc is very, from like he first shows up to when he's sitting in the back of the cop car at the end of the movie. It's a fairly riveting arc to see someone just completely destroyed over the course of
Mhm.
2 hours, in a way where most of the time you think he's one step ahead of him. Like
Yeah.
you think that Mills and Somerset are kind of ahead of this guy, or at least they're equals, right? And when they're sort of battling in this sort of game of cat and mouse, and then you sort of realize that, like, no, 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 he was ahead of them the whole time, which is
Yeah.
just, it's, I don't know, it's a gut punch.
It's like I saw the devil. It's like now thinking more on it, it's like I can see how much that film would have been influenced by Seven, that like cat and mouse and that big like kind of how it just builds up and then destroys. Just I'm always looking for any excuse to talk about I saw the devil, but
Which is your favorite movie of all time
it's
for
my
the audience,
favorite of
right?
all
Yeah.
time.
If you don't know, if you longtime
Absolutely.
watchers will know this already, but like if you're just tuning in on
It's the
YouTube,
best movie, my
it's,
favorite. Yeah.
and you showed it to me too, and I was blown away by it too, and I was like, holy, like I was thinking about that movie for like a couple days afterwards, and
Yeah.
it's very similar. I mean, it's different than this movie, of course, but like
It's like a
it is still
spiritual
that sort of like,
sibling. Yeah.
you don't really know where it's going, you don't really know, but you know bad shit's coming. Like it's like,
Yeah.
this
You
isn't
don't know
going to
how
end
far
with
ahead
like,
he is.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, okay. So, but before we run out of time completely tonight, let's talk about
Mhm.
the quotes from the film, because I think
Yeah.
this is a very, very quotable film. It's got lots of quotes that I think have stayed with me over the years, for whatever reason. But yeah, did you want to go first, or how do you want to do this?
Sure. Yeah, I'll go first. So, some of my favorite quotes. One is when they're talking about motivation, and Mill says, "Who knows? So many freaks out there doing their little evil deeds they don't want to do. The voices made me do it. My dog made me do it. Jodie Foster made me do it." Which I think is like a really funny kind of way to acknowledge, like, to John Hinckley Jr. and David Berkowitz, notoriously David Berkowitz, my dog made me do it, and John Hinckley Jr., who was a stalker of Jodie Foster and attempted to assassinate Ronald Reagan in an attempt to like impress her. So I thought that was kind of fun and clever. When William Somerset says, "If we catch John Doe and he turns out to be the devil, I mean, if he's Satan himself, that might live up to our expectations. But he's not the devil; he's just a man," which I think is
Mhm.
fantastic. And last, by David Mills, "He's a nutbag. Just because the fucker's got a library card doesn't make him Yoda," which I think is also great, and the genesis of my subtitle today.
So a couple tie-ins there. One, David Fincher was I think he worked camera on Return of the Jedi. That was one of his first gigs as a filmmaker. He did a lot of commercials
No
and that
way.
sort of stuff. But when he was very, very, very young, he did work on Return of the Jedi. So I wonder if that's a little bit of a shout out to his past,
Mm,
with that Yoda reference, but also to the Jodie Foster thing. I mean, clearly this movie came out, about 4 years after Silence of the Lambs, which, again, when we did our deep dive on it, another massive hit. And a couple of tie-ins that into this is the Wild Bill leather store I always thought that maybe there's a little nice little kind of shout, a little tip of
Absolutely.
the cap to
Absolutely.
Silence of the
Ruggl's
Lambs.
leather, absolutely.
And yeah, and and Howard Shore actually composed
Yeah.
the scores for both films, for Silence of the Lambs and Seven, and they're very very distinctly different, but still have that sort of like overlying sort of sense of dread throughout. So yeah, interesting.
Your
Yes, my
quotes.
quotes were like I love it's used in a lot of the trailers, but when it kind of takes place right after the uh, they find the painting that's upside down basically, and they find help me underneath the painting where Mills says, honestly, have you ever seen anything like this? And Somerset says no, which is great because up until that point Somerset has definitely he's sort of said, hey, this is happening, this is going to be some weird thing, I can't make this my last case, like et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And even to sort of like the end of the first act basically, or start of the second act, he's now never seen anything like this in his like 30 years or 35 years career of being a detective in this kind of like grimy, decaying city. So I always love that quote. The other one is when Mills has when Mills and Somerset are taking John Doe out to the I don't know what you would call it. I always want to say desert, but that's not what it is. But on the outskirts of town,
The fields.
the fields. John Doe's in the back of the car, and Mills says, "You're no Messiah. You're a movie of the week. You're a fucking T-shirt at best." Um, I also like the idea that sorry, the not the idea, but the overarching, the whole monologue from John Doe I was going to include, but it's too long. But that is like, to me, it was weird watching it now because of Kevin Spacey and all the the stuff that he's being embroiled in. But as a film, as a script, as a piece of dialogue, as a monologue, it's a brilliantly timed and executed monologue. I think it's excellent. So I can't give that enough credit because I just feel like it's something that's always resonated with me over the years. Going back to what we were talking about with Tracy and what she was saying was when John Doe says, she begged for her life and the life of the baby inside her. And then Somerset punches him, and then he looks up and he goes, he didn't know. And I love
Mm.
that delivery. That line is so good. And I guess my last one, sorry, not to add a second one, but I love the last words of the film, which are Ernest Hemingway once wrote, "The world is a fine place and worth fighting for." I agree with the second part, which a little piece of personal information. I don't have any tattoos. I don't have any tattoos, believe it or not, but I would consider getting that tattooed, to be honest, because I love that quote so much. And I feel it resonated in 95. I feel it's resonated in every decade since. So
Mhm.
that's where I stand on that. I made that quote has made an impact probably on my entire life, to be honest.
Wonderful.
There you
So
go.
final
There you
thought.
go.
Final
The
thought.
end. Okay, bye guys.
The end.
um,
So final thoughts, yeah. Or
yeah.
anything else you wanted to add?
No, I think I mean I think again I think it's a film that deserves to be, it's funny because John Doe has a line in here which says, what I've done is should be studied and will be dissected and studied for years to come, forever. I think this is a film that deserves that same sort of recognition. I think every sort of anybody looking to make a film, anyone looking to write one should add this to their list of a film that they should really watch multiple times, just to get those beats, just to see how that story's put together, as
Mhm.
well as any other movie that's looking to incorporate some detective work. Things don't just
Yeah.
happen in this movie. They put pieces together in order to get to the next spot, which is, called detective work. And I love that. I think it's a good mystery, is hard to beat. And I think this is probably one of the best mysteries ever put on film.
Yep. I think that such a perfect film that's immediately recognizable through just 4 words. If you say to anyone, "What's in the box?" The first look you're gonna be like, like, everybody knows what's in the box, I think. Um, and to have just 4 such simple words be so iconic is just brilliant. I love when John Doe, just another quote, says, sorry, when he's talking to them on the phone, um, and, he says, "Sorry I had to hurt one of you, but I really didn't have a choice, did I?" And then later on he says, "You will accept my apology, won't you? I feel like saying more, but I don't want to ruin the surprise." The more I thought about that, he absolutely was planning Tracy right from the get-go. Because I had to hurt one of you, I didn't have a choice, and you will accept my apology. I don't want to ruin the surprise. At the
Oh, so he's
time, when you first hear that line of
oh
dialogue, you think he's talking about like, oh, the murders and
Somerset,
revealing who he is,
or
but
he's talking about Somerset and Mills, not necessarily.
he's
You're
talking
saying that
about he's
Mills and
talking
Tracy.
about Mills and Tracy. Yeah, exactly. And that's what I think he's talking about. So
I
the
had
more
not
I
thought
kind
of
of
that.
picked that apart, the more I realized that, this movie is really about the horror of a meticulous man, like, because everything is so plotted out and so meticulously planned and so detailed and so like right down to cutting off his fingertips every day so that they're the finger pads every day so he doesn't have any fingerprints anywhere.
Yeah,
The fact that he had some of his victims for a year in captivity before revealing that big murder, like these took a long time. This took a lot of energy. Again, thousands of notebooks filled with words that are not dated, not, it really is about that intensity of that serial killer, and there's something about John Doe, even the fact that we don't even have a character name for him, he's just John Doe, that will remain ultimately so iconic. I think right along there with Hannibal Lecter is, like, definitely one of the top 2 undoubtedly most iconic serial killers committed to film, particularly in this time period, I think. But whenever,
mhm.
as mentioned before, you talk to someone about serial killer films, these are usually the first 2 that they mention, and these are usually the first 2 serial killers that you think about. And I think that that kind of speaks to the lasting legacy of this film, and also again to how well written it is, how well planned it is, and how scary it can be to have someone that is that well that good at planning.
Yeah, and I think there's little tie-ins too that if you don't pay attention, you miss. One being that Victor, who is the sloth victim,
Hmm.
his lawyer is the greed victim,
Yeah,
and that's the tie-in. So that's why they think that's the motive. And when they go with the SWAT team, like Mills and Somerset kind of agree with each other, and they're like, "Doesn't this feel like a little too straightforward?" Like
easy.
it's like, and
Yeah,
it's like little call outs to the audience being like, yeah, you don't know where this is going. And it's like, I
mhm.
love that stuff when it's like, okay, so they're gonna like, this is the guy, right? Like, nothing doesn't like. I love movies that when you watch them and you're like, this kind of doesn't make sense, and then it makes sense, and then you're like, oh my god, I was like, this writer is ahead of me where I'm thinking,
Yeah,
and I think that is something they don't do in movies anymore. And I think if this movie was made today, I don't think it would have the impact. I don't think it would be made as it was. And I also think that David Fincher he had something to prove big time. Like he knew
mhm.
what he wanted to put on screen with Alien 3 and wasn't allowed to do it. And with this film, I think he was able to execute that. And you could say every other film he made after this is very, very detailed and very, very sort of he's very particular in how he wants things done. And I think he tells
He's
really
been
great
burned
stories to
before.
yeah, exactly. So as you may have noticed, longtime viewers of the show, or if you watched the last couple episodes, we do have a new segment called Grumps, Gripes, Grievances, and whatever. But we actually skipped that. It's not like we forgot. We skipped it
Oh,
because there are none. We don't really have any. I don't
grumps,
have any, at
gripes,
least.
grievances. Yeah,
Grumps, gripes,
I don't
grievances, and whatever. What was the fourth one? I can't remember any of them.
grouch.
Grouches,
I don't remember.
grumps, gripes,
Grouches.
grievances, and grouches. Things that we hated about the movie, things that we wish that were done better. I don't have any personally.
Yeah,
I think this is close to, if it's not a 5 out of 5 film, it's most definitely a 4.5. I don't give quarter stars to films because
it's not about that life.
that's lame, and we don't do that here. So standard 5-star rating for me. That's how I rate movies. I think I gotta lean one way or the other. So I think I gotta go five
Yeah.
out of five. So
Yeah, yeah. No grievances on this one. I think the only thing that, again, like the Tracy argument, but again, I think that there's a reason for that, and it makes to me a lot more impact with her involvement being the level that it is, particularly when you realize that he's dropping this hint about her that early on in the movie. It just works so well for me. So yeah, I think 5 out of 5 for me on this one, dog. This is a great film, and if you haven't seen it, spoiled a lot of it, so
yeah,
sorry.
yeah.
But
But if you have, like, the purpose of these things, like, if you have, go and rewatch it. Go and
rewatch,
rewatch it.
rewatch it.
Take what we said. If we've missed something, let us know in the comments below, or drop us a line on social media. And we love to hear different theories and that sort of stuff. I know there's a bunch online about this movie as well. But yeah, I mean, for the most part, I think like this movie made an indelible impact on me. when I watched it. And it's a movie I always return to and always watch with a lot of awe, with just how it's executed
Reverence.
and how it's, yeah, like how it shows up and how it kind of, like you were saying, how it plots out and executes at the end. So I don't really have anything bad to say about it. So if you haven't seen it, sorry for ruining it. But if you have, go back and watch it. Tell us what we missed, and tell us if you got any fan theories or interesting facts and interesting tie-ins that we don't know about. Because I feel like when you go back to this movie time and time again, I feel like you always find something new about it. So which is super cool. So with that said, listen, we went a few minutes over. We're sorry. I mean, Kells will trust me, she'll hold my feet to the fire about this later on. But I just feel that some movies, when you love them so much, and you got to talk about them until you're done
Gotta
talking
do
about
him
them.
justice.
So you
Yeah.
got to do it. So, but anyway, we'll keep it. Well, let's put a pin in it there. Thanks again for tuning in to 90s Night. Of course, I'm Benner from Black Fawn Distro, and my co-host is Kells McNells. You've checked out this episode on YouTube, and maybe you've checked out a part of the short or something like that somewhere else. But please follow us on all the social media platforms. We're at Black Fawn Distro, and of course, if you have checked this out on YouTube, and hey, you dig what we're doing, you dig this kind of format as well as our other shorter or longer formats, please remember to share and give this channel a subscribe. We'd really appreciate it. And of course, back to your regularly scheduled programming, I guess. My name's Benner. This is Kells, and it's been another edition of 90s Night. We'll see you soon.